on Easy Learning. Today I am going to start a new chapter. This is The Leader of Man, written by Siddharth Chowdhury. Students, in this part of the video, I will at first read the chapter, and in the other parts of the videos I will explain them. So just be with me patiently. Without wasting the time, I am going to read this chapter, The Leader of Man, written by Siddharth Chowdhury. The Leader of Man by Siddharth Chowdhury. Siddharth Chowdhury, born in 1974 and brought up in Patna, now lives in New Delhi and works for a publishing house. He is a promising fiction writer and translator. As a writer, his important works include Patna Rough Cut, a novel which is a heartfelt homage to his hometown, and Diksha at St. Martin's, which is a maverick collection of short stories based on the lives and loves of young people in Patna and New Delhi. As a translator, his major works is the Hindi translation of Eliot Weinberger's prose poem The Stars for the Museum of Modern Art, New York in 2005. The Leader of Man, taken from Diksha at St. Martin's, is a tragic story of a poor man's hardships in a city life with social prejudices. The Leader of Man. He was one of the replacement guards that came to work in our apartment building at the end of November. There are 4 guards in residence at all times. 2 of them work in the daytime and the other 2 at night. They stay in poky little servant quarters near the parking lot and are not allowed to keep their families in there. Most of these security guards are lazy, miserable fellows who are, it seems, just content to survive somehow. Most of them are illiterate and of the lower castes, and amidst the gleaming chrome of the shining cars, their poverty stands out in glaring contrast. So I was taken by surprise when I first saw Roop Singh last December when I was back in Patna for the winter vacations. He wasn't at all like the other guards. He was around 5'10", well-built, had a long, sharp patrician nose and glorious light brown moustache that covered the upper lip and curled at the ends in a defiant flourish. He did credit to his name. His uniform was always ironed and creased, and the shoes were gleaming black. He was so different from his little brother in mismatched uniforms and dusty brown kids that he was actually a revelation in the true sense of the word. He simply didn't fit in at all. So the first time I saw him, he was at the reception counter in the lobby and was getting a dressing down from Mr. Kedia. Mr. Kedia lives right across our flat in F9 and is in his late 30s. He has sundry business interests and is reputed to be fairly rich. He has the stupid arrogance that comes with it, and he wears it on his face with the same sense of pride as the hideous chunky gold watch on his left wrist and the Motorola cell phone on his right hip. He is short and stocky and going bald. His face has started to bloat from excess of straws wear. He is the kind of on-the-make, ready to take up worldly mobile enterprising men whom we see hovering around the periphery of our lives with alarming alacrity, but then I guess it is a positive thing. Kedia is the consummate consumer, a true child of his times. He has to buy things randomly to live, to survive, to find a purpose for his life. When he consumes, he lives, buying in his brand of nirvana. If a new car is not launched in the next 6 months, he may simply fold up and die. Back to the story now. There was Roop Singh standing behind the counter and Kedia in front of him, shouting, and another man who looked just like Kedia, gold watch and all, gesticulating frantically and shouting in the same breath. They were both very angry with Roop for some reason or the other. Normally, I wouldn't have stopped it because every few days or so Kedia shout at one another or other, one worker or other. He is the president of the Owners Association and he takes it very seriously. But it was Roop, his open confidence, face and erect, bearing an innate pride in himself, the sense of defiance and wounded honor in his eyes that made me pause and look over the scene in a new light. A totally astonishing things happened then, Roop said to Kedia, but it was not my fault, sir. I was just doing my duty. In impeccable English, albeit with a little lilt of a rustic accent. Now this is wonderful, I thought. I could suddenly sense drama in the lazy December air. Kedia is stupefied and he can't believe he has heard right. And nor can his friend, for it has to be his friend. I can deduce it from the shock on their faces. The rights of snobbery have suddenly been reversed. I am sure Roop too can see it in their eyes. I am interested now, but I realize how trivial the problem really is. Kedia is now all red in face and bluster breaks out of it like hot air from a punctured balloon. You talk English to me? How dare you talk? I just said that I was doing my duty and I am not a rascal. I do understand English, Roop said to Kedia in Hindi. I will kick you out. Roop kept quiet at this and content in his anger, but just barely. I intervened around this time with neutral. What's the matter, Mr. Kedia? He turned and looked at me. Normally, he doesn't ever acknowledge my presence, but that day I could see he was glad that I was there. He thought of me as an ally against the class enemy, but soon I would prove to be the contrary. Ah, Ritvik, good you are here. He started to speak in English, but I guess better sense prevailed and he switched over to Hindi, which was worse than his English. But anyway, my friend Mr. Sharma here, the man smiled, and I smiled back. Came to see me 15 minutes back, and this idiot of a guard wouldn't let him come up to my place. I come here every week and this has never happened to me before. He wanted me to talk to Mr. Kedia over the intercom, and when I refused, he physically stopped me from going upstairs. I felt embarrassed in being involved with something as stupid as this, but still I said he was only doing his duty, and moreover he is new and doesn't know you. He insulted my guest, Kedia shouted, but there wasn't much conviction in his voice anymore. These rules have been made by us, Mr. Kedia, and Mr. Singh was only doing what he has been told to do, and it is for your own safety. Sharma and Kedia glared at me, and then Kedia said, Ritvik, I am going to complain to your father. You don't even know how to talk to your elders. I smiled at him and kept quiet. He went away hurriedly into the elevator with his friend in tow. I took the stairs. Later on, I learned from Munna, my servant, that his name was Roop and that he was a Rajput. Munna also told me that the other guards didn't like him much and thought him to be haughty and stuck up. He thought this was because Roop was of a forward caste, all the other being backward. He generally kept to himself and after his duties were over, read books in the guard room. All this seemed to Munna as subversive behavior, but even he grudgingly agreed that he was the best ever security guard that had worked at our building. He was smart, efficient, and did his job quietly and competently, and for this he got the princely sum of 600 rupees a month and subsisted on boiled rice and potatoes like the other guards. All this for mere 600 rupees a month. My shirts cost much more than that. It was ridiculous, the sum, but it was true. Kedia did complain to my father, but my father didn't say anything to me, like I knew he wouldn't. But after the incident, Kedia, with his wounded pride, came down hard on Roop Singh. He criticized Roop for everything and anything. He called him inefficient and insolent, and once claimed that he had caught him sleeping at night while on duty. He was bent on getting him kicked out of the place, but the other residents opposed the move, and so Roop stayed. Kiria just couldn't take the fact that a poor miserable little guard had answered back to him, and that too in English. He was sure it was just to show him up in front of his friend and worse, me. He was really sore about the English part. In his blind vanity, he probably never even realized that he could have been wrong. He had always been rich, and rich are always right. According to him, there could be no two ways about it. Roop, on his part, didn't do anything that was counter-reactionary, except that he stopped saluting Kiria. Whenever someone else would be with Kiria, he would salute the other person, but ignore Kiria, and this galled him no end. It was during those days that I came to know more about Roop from talking with him every evening for 10-15 minutes after I returned home. He felt obliged to me and later thanked me for my intervention that fateful day. The other guards by that time had started to come around. Roop would read to them from the newspaper and tell them what was happening around the world. Not that they were much interested. They had unofficially elected him to their leader, and I thought that it was fitting, for he came from a race that were once leaders of man warriors. His ancestors must have waged wars against the British and the Mughals and fought glorious battles amidst the golden sand dunes of Mewar. I think I am needlessly romanticizing him. Probably his ancestors were as poor as he was and were simple farmers toiling hard for their daily meal, but who knows? He was an educated person. He had studied till the intermediate from the College of Commerce, Patna, the very same degree college I had gone to, albeit for a short time and much later than him. I didn't tell him that because I thought it might embarrass him. His father, who was a farmer, had died around that time, and Roop had to leave his studies and look for a job. He went back to farming when he couldn't find any job that he liked. They didn't have much land, and some of it had to be sold for his sister's wedding. He himself had married when he was just 15 and now had a wife and a son back home in the village. The income from the farm wasn't much, so he left farming to his younger brother, who wasn't much interested in education anyway, and started looking for a job again. Eventually, he got a job as a teacher in a school near Behta, but after 6 months without pay and with no hope of the situation ever changing, he left the job and came to Patna. Drifting from job to job, sometimes working as a sales help in a grocery store, sometimes as a construction worker. Finally, around 4 months back, he had got the job with the security agency. He would tell me all these things without even an ounce of self-pity. Yet I could feel the helplessness beneath his practiced stoicism. He hadn't seen his family in 6 months, and sometimes it made him deeply melancholic. For a man of his background, he was amazingly aware and well-read. He loved reading and often would talk to me about books and he had read and what he had felt about them. His perception was remarkably acute. I realized his was a sharper critical faculty than mine, even though I am a student of literature, perhaps because my experience of life has largely been vicarious, while his, I am sure, has been more lived in comprehensive bound. Though I am not as well read in Hindi literature as I want to be, I have some books, and these I lent to him. Among the books were a collection of Mukti Bodh's poems, the complete short stories of Renu, and Dinkar's Rashmi Rathi. He returned the Mukti Bodh back the very next day. In the evening, when there would be no one in the lobby, we would sit on the bench that was there and talk about the books and stories and life in general. Little informal chit-chat until I finished my cigarette and went back home upstairs. Around that time he stopped saluting me, and I was glad that he had stopped. Somehow it had always made me vaguely uneasy. After all, we were not in the army. He had one sweater that he would wear all the time, a bright maroon one that his wife had sent, and he wore it with much pride over his grey uniform. In the last week of December, he sent a letter to my father asking for an advance of 100 rupees, which should be cut from his next month's salary because he suddenly had to send money home and now was in dire need of it in order to survive. He had written that he hadn't eaten anything for 2 days and now was having difficulty in doing his shift. It was short, formal, a very official letter. Father had gone out, so I went down with the money and gave it to him, and also sent some food with Munna for him and the other guards. When Kidia came to know, he laughed at my naivete and called Roop a lazy freeloader. He thought about that probably Roop and other guards drank at night because he had heard noises sometimes, and that is where all the money went. I kept quiet. Kedia is a devout man. He gives donations to temples, organizes jagrans regularly, and himself performs puja for an hour every morning. But strangely enough, has no faith in any other human being. Sometimes I wonder what kind of God he believes in. It must be the God of small things. On 31st night, a big bonfire and party was organized on the terrace of our apartment building. Since I am not a very social type, I hadn't gone up to join the party, but instead I watched Michelangelo Antonioni's wonderful blow-up on cable TV. My parents came home by 11 p.m. and much before the old year had rung out and the new year rung in, the party had died a cold, lingering death. Many families had failed to turn up, and it always happened at these things. More food than needed had been ordered and was now left untouched on the tables. Great heaps of chicken and meat and biryani and paneer and kofta curry, gulab jamun with no one to consume it all. The ladies came down by 11:30 and the remaining gentlemen drunks were in no position to stand, let alone eat. Anyway, one of the gentlemen drunks suddenly felt in his breast the milk of human kindness and said to Mona, who was there watching the antics and mixing the drinks and having a few pegs of his own, I am sure, Munna beta, no downstairs and bring the guards up to eat. I am sure, Munna beta, go downstairs and bring 2 guards up to eat. Someone has to eat these damn things. So Munna went downstairs and the guards came up and all of them except Roop gouged on the food and went downstairs satisfied. 2 of them had upset stomachs the next morning. As Roop picked up the plate and started to serve himself, Kedia rolled over to him and said loudly, "So, Mr. Singh, I hope you are not hungry now. You probably haven't even eaten such fabulous food ever in your life. So eat carefully, don't overdo it." And then he laughed and patted Roop on the back, patronizingly. Roop felt as if someone had lit a long-abandoned fuse inside his body, and that it was snaking up slowly to his brain. He quietly put the plate down and walked away, aware of everybody's eyes boring into his back. The other guards chose to ignore Roop's reaction. They enjoyed themselves to the full. What happened next can only be called unfortunate, maybe tragic, but tragic has a kind of grandeur attached to it, which doesn't necessarily include the minor character of this world. Roop was on night duty on the 31st of December. After the party had died down and people gone to sleep, Roop sat in the lobby and brooded about what had happened. This is all reconstruction, all conjecture on my part, because the evidence is all physical and doesn't really say anything about his mind, except that he was perhaps hopelessly melancholic and full of hurt and pain. He probably thought about his family, about his no-good brother, but a loyal one nevertheless, his beautiful wife who still looked young in spite of it, and it all and his beloved land, his own little field of wasted dreams, on a part of which a bright red flag was with a hammer and sickle had appeared suddenly one day, and a small chunk of land was lost to him forever. As if by magic, he remembered he had cried that night, holding his wife tightly, and she too crying silently, and their son sleeping serenely by their side. It was his son's beautiful, calm face that made him go out in the morning and leave the village. It was his son's face again that night around 4 o'clock in the morning that finally upset the delicate balance of his mind. With his bare hands he ripped the whole lobby apart. With his fists he broke the glass revolving doors, the wooden bench where we sat and talked, the red plastic chairs and the intercom system. His hands were bleeding badly, the fingers broken at many places, and when Haripal, the other guards that night, tried to stop him, he punched him in the mouth. He was totally oblivious to pain, and only when Haripal came back with other two guards and they all beat him up that he became quiet. But by that time the lobby was totally thrashed. Haripal came to inform us, and my father woke me up and we went downstairs. Some other residents followed in a little while. Roop was in the guard room. They had tied him up with a rubber hose pipe. His face was swollen and his hands were badly smashed. The eyes were blank, expressionless, like the eyes of people we sometimes see in BBC documentaries in some remote corner of the world, struck by natural disaster, an earthquake, a drought, or a cyclone. I untied his hands and legs, but he sat there on the floor motionless. Kedia didn't come down. Later I knew why he didn't. My father and a few other residents took Roop to a nursing home nearby. He had multiple fractures on his hands. He probably would never work with his hands again. Damaged beyond repair. We have sued. The security agency sometimes has to pay for the damages, I guess. So with this I have completed the reading. Now if you want to get line by line Hindi explanation, I will explain from next parts of the videos.